Finding the right boarding barn for you and your horse can be a really challenging process, especially if you're moving from somewhere far away. In today's video, I'm going to share some tips and some things to consider when you're looking for the next home for you and your horse. I'm Julia, and you're watching the weekly show at the EC Network. Let's jump on in. During my riding career, I've made several moves to different locations, and I've had to figure out exactly where the best place was for me and my horse. And I want to share some of the tips that I have sort of used as guidelines to help me find the perfect place for me and my horse. Now, when I first come to a boarding facility, one of the first things I like to look at is the horses on that property. And I'm not necessarily seeing what caliber of horse they are. What I'm looking for is, what do the horses look like? Are they in good weight? Do they have nice coats? Do they have a ton of cuts and scars all over them? I also want to consider what their feet look like. I'm really just taking in the overall account of what that horse looks like physically. That can tell you a lot about how a facility treats their animals. Now, I will give the caveat of sometimes if a horse has been newer to a facility, they might not be in the best weight. They might still be working out some things for their care. So that is something to consider. Not every horse is going to look like a superstar, but it can be a really good indication of whether or not that facility puts horse care at the forefront of what they're doing. The second thing I like to look at when I'm evaluating a facility is, what do the actual facilities look like? And it doesn't mean that something has to be super fancy, but I just want to make sure that everything looks safe. I'll evaluate the fence. Is the fencing something that I'm comfortable putting my horse in? Or are there a ton of nails sticking out everywhere and fence boards down? Things like that. Certain horses seem to do better in pastures that have an electric fence, and that's something you'll have to consider as well. If your horse tends to be an escape artist, you'll want to make sure that you find somewhere that has an electric fence or something like that to just keep things a little bit more secure. I'll also just make sure that the stalls are free of any ammonia smell, or that there's no manure left in them. If your horse is going to be in a stall, you want to make sure that that's nice and clean. Same thing with run-in sheds. It should be, pretty free of a ton of manure. Again, we have to understand as horse people that it's not going to necessarily look perfect, but it's relatively clean and dry. Along with that comes good ventilation. So you'll actually may be able to hear it a little bit in my microphone, but the barn that's behind me has a great fan system, so the air really is circulating through. And although it can make for a little chillier barn in the winter, really for horse health, having good ventilation in a barn is super important. You'll also want to factor in the riding facility. So if there's an indoor, having an indoor is really important to you, making sure that that's available. Figuring out the availability of the riding arenas. Are there lessons? Are you allowed to ride during those lessons? Those are just some factors to consider, because you don't want to move your horse somewhere and then not be able to ride as much as you'd like. So again, having an indoor. I also like to take a look at the footing. My horse Rumba, she's an older mare, and she tends to have trouble on really rocky or really hard footing. Her arthritis just seems to bother her a little bit more on that type of footing. And also, if it's too deep, she gets a little uncomfortable. So I like to look for footing that stays pretty nice most of the time for her. So just something to consider as well. If your horse is barefoot, sometimes footing in arenas can be like a stone dust material, and that almost wears down their feet and can get a little uncomfortable for certain horses that are barefoot. So those are just some factors that you'll want to consider from a riding perspective. And finally, you'll want to take note of, what are the people like at the barn? A lot of us spend a ton of time at the barn, and in turn we spend a lot of time with the people who are at the barn. So you want to make sure that you feel welcomed, like you could be a part of the community, and that there are riding opportunities there for you. You want to make sure that the trainer, if there's one on staff, aligns with your goals and your morals as a rider. Are there other people about your riding level who you could ride with every day? Those are some things to take note of when you're looking for your next boarding barn. These were just a few simple guidelines to follow when you're looking for the next boarding barn for you and your horse. Of course, there's tons of different factors that play into this. Budget, turnout, riding facilities, showing opportunities, but this is really going to just give you a basic understanding of what you could look at next time you're looking for a new facility for you and your horse. Thanks so much for watching.